Greetings. Welcome to Ross Reports, the headline. This is part 2 of the saga of ISIS for the day. I'm reporting out of an article at Haaretz, which is a prominent publication in Jerusalem. It says it seems a hidden hand is directing events in the Middle East, balancing the various threats. And then it begins to point at Iran. This article was all over the place. Iran has managed to largely shed its image as a threatening state. They say that ISIS has given Iran the status of a rational state, as if Ismail is rational. Saudi Arabia, which led the Arab coalition against ISIS at the request of the United States, also warned the United States against bringing Iran into the coalition. So let's just go ahead and trust the Saudis. Oh, and by the way, could you give us those 28 pages? Saudi Arabia is having a showdown against Qatar. Again, Satan is divided against himself. And Saudi Arabia has so far failed to present a solution to the crisis in Syria, and with regard to the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, it has remained in the background. Egypt is dependent on Saudi Arabia, not Iran. It talks about Libya and Tunisia and Yemen, how Yemen was conquered by the Houthis following a Shiite separatist faction that constitutes about 45% of the population. Al-Qaeda is operating freely in the southern part of the country, and the call to divide Yemen into north and south could be fulfilled next year. International military action does not promise the destruction of the organization or its uprooting from the Middle East, but this is at least a goal in which achievements can be presented in statistics, such as the destruction of oil installations. Mike Rogers is coming out. He's, of course, you know, the ex-FBI, ex-head of Senate Intelligence, a 50-year-old man, Republican, and now he's got his own talk show. He's coming out. He says we need more spies and more paramilitaries with greater freedom to operate in order to defeat Al-Qaeda. He claims the White House's tight control of counterterrorism has made America less safe. He says we have handcuffed our capabilities, one arm behind our back. Well, Mike, I don't know how you can handcuff yourself with one arm behind your back, okay? You know, we've reported a bunch of times, the Al-Qaeda and ISIS are both umbrella terms. They're grouping groups of individuals. ISIS doesn't even exist. They're totally divided against themselves. In 2011, Syrian President Bashar Assad released, I think it was about 150 fighters that are so-called ISIS terrorists. Really? Anyway, Mike says they're trying to micromanage the whole thing, talking about Barack Obama. Well, Mike, maybe if you stop spending all your money and time and energy and resources into tapping innocent Americans, you might have prevented this from the gate. Overly cautious, Rogers said. Well, stop sending the CIA to steal everybody else's wealth. He says that betting on a fledgling U.S. training program in Saudi Arabia could produce 5,000 Western-friendly Syria troops by sometime late in the coming year. So Saudi Arabia is now, they're going to be in charge of the fight against ISIS. Moderate rebel groups have to work with al-Nusra in particular. The more established they are, he said, the more likely they are to succeed in hitting the U.S. Like the plot they pushed in Australia, where they urged followers to randomly kidnap people and film their decapitations and upload it onto YouTube. Not so complicated, Mike said. So it worries me. I'm sure it worries you. Sure. Chris Hedges, man, he's calling ISIS the new Ismail. He compared ISIS creation to how Ismail came to be a country. This is a recipe for apocalyptic warfare. Which I agree. You know, you have to look at Revelation, and you have to remember that when Jerusalem is surrounded by the enemies, we are in the end times. So the evangelists like to commonly refer to the enemies of the Palestinians. Of course, they attribute them to be the Philistines. Apparently, they don't know who St. George was. And by the way, if you are really the children of Israel, why didn't you defeat the Philistines way back in Samuel? Other people are attributing ISIS to a swarm of locusts, so apparently this has become some fulfillment of prophecy in the scripture. Again, we always have to look at the origin of this group. Now, I made a mistake before I did my first report on ISIS. I should have came out and spoke about the Western intelligence being the origin, but I mean, to me it was a given. I mean, obviously, the majority of the multitude doesn't get it, but of course they're consumed with, you know, whatever they're looking at on whatever they're looking at. Finding it hard to manage some of the areas they captured in Syria and Iraq, ISIS, apparently there's a class of culture between occupier and occupied. Most Syrian and Iraqi Sunnis aren't all that religious, it states, so the ISIS being this radical extremist isn't exactly attracting the Sunnis to it at this point, which was what the intelligence originally thought was going to happen. They're moved much more by tribal loyalties and nationalism. So now there's this push, instead of having the religious extremist point of view, it's more of a national point of view, and of course they've adapted the term Islamic State to reflect that. Some people are saying, well, we're going to start calling them Daesh, but I haven't heard anybody but Iran and France really take that seriously. Some are mad enough, inspired enough to commit what we see for some reason termed lone wolf terror. Call J.